Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you happen to be watching on, and they should show up here in my chat room, assuming that you're watching live, and we can communicate directly. And I hope you're having a wonderful day. I hope you've had a wonderful week. And today is our weekly roundup of interesting stories. And I do have a couple of interesting stories for today. And they, I have several interesting nature stories for today. But I want to start with a story left over from yesterday. And yesterday, in our chat room, we had a couple of what I would describe as trolls. um, basically propositioning people for psychic readings. And the message was something to the aspect of inbox me now for your free intuitive reading. And I just want to tell you very bluntly, don't ever accept an offer like that. No reputable psychic would ever do that. And our first news story is that no reputable psychic would ever do that. Um, you see this happen all over the internet. It seems to be a big thing at the moment, and there are no circumstances under which it's going to end well. So I strongly recommend you to ignore any such message that you see. Um, and it's roughly equivalent to people who send unwanted romantic requests. You know it's not real, or things like that, and this isn't real. So, hello to Christine in the chat room. So I'm going to call that a brief little news story, and just remind you, when you see that sort of thing, that's not a legitimate spiritual practitioner. And we do have people who who parasite on our community that way. Now, for our actual stories, if you were watching last week, you'll remember that one of our big stories for the weekly roundup was on the zombie fungus that is afflicting the returning cicadas and taking over their bodies to recreate itself. And that a similar such fungus preys on ants, for example. And that this is something that exists in the insect world. And it's very interesting. It kind of tied into our examination of zombies last week. Um, but it was interesting. And this week we have several other interesting animal stories. And then we've got some non-animal stories. And our first story is about um, the use of medicine among primates. And hello to Janet in the chat room. And this week in the news was a story about a Sumatran orangutan um, who has become the first wild animal seen using natural medicine on itself. And this is kind of a remarkable story. Um, and it is, I believe, only the second story of active wound treatment in non-human animals, the other being among chimpanzees, and I think the first in a wild um, primate. And the orangutan is given the name of Raku, I believe, by the scientists who have been observing orangutans in this area. And Raku was recently injured, presumably in a fight with another orangutan, and was observed to, on his own accord, treat himself with a medicinal plant. And the particular plant is called, I had the name, it's called Acar Kuning, and its Latin name is Fibraria tinctoria. And it's a native local plant that is used by people in traditional medicine in Sumatra. And the orangutan, whose name is Racus, was seen chewing on the leaves and then applying the resulting juice and paste to cover a facial wound. And that 5 days later, the wound was closed and after a month was fully healed. So not only was he using the plant as a medicine, but he used it quite effectively as a medicine. And I've seen photos, and you can find them easily online, that show the wound. And it was a pretty considerable wound. Um, and as stated, this is only the second time that a primate has been seen treating a wound this way. And the first time I gather that a wild primate has been seen doing it. And that is kind of epochal. Now, it's probably a perfectly ordinary thing they've been doing all along and nobody's observed it. Um, but if you had asked a few weeks ago um, about ways in which humans are different from other primates, the use of medicine would probably have been really high on that list. And it no longer can be there because we now know that they also know the healing properties of certain plants and use them medicinally. Um, and that, again, it's pretty epochal to have evidence of that. The idea of it, I, I don't know that I'm sure it's not an idea that's never occurred to anyone, but it's never actually been observed and is something that people would previously have thought that only people do. And increasingly we're finding more and more that non-people, um, non-humans, have many of the things we thought previously were exclusive to ourselves. And we've talked about this a little bit in previous shows also. And we observe it in things like this instance with Racus the orangutan, um, doing medication for himself. We also have observed, for example, through archaeology, that the Neanderthals, who of course are a kind of human, but a different kind of human no longer among us, were obviously doing things that we had previously thought only Homo sapiens did. And we now know that these things were not unique to us. And hello to Jade in the chat room. And I have personally the belief we'll find a lot more things are not unique to us. We learned long ago, for example, that primates can learn sign language and communicate far more extensively than we had previously thought. Coco the gorilla being the star example, but not the only one. Um, and what's true for primates may be true for others. And we're learning increasingly about the intellectual capabilities of octopuses, for example. And it really should be changing how we look at nature and our relationship to it. Now, I always say that it's my opinion that that change should not be a Disneyfication of our relationship to nature, but certainly a sophistication of our relationship to nature and how we view other animals. Um, the fact the fact that we can see now that they can understand the concept of medicine and identify the plants that can be helpful in medicinal ways. Um, if nothing else had caught our attention, that should catch our attention. And orangutans as a species are in considerable danger from years of hunting and territorial encroachment and so forth. And we really need to be a little bit more mindful of the things that we're destroying while we're destroying them, and maybe not destroy them. And as we see from this, some of what we're destroying we didn't even realize was there to be destroyed. Now, that's our first cute little animal story for the day, if you want to call it a cute animal story. Um, it certainly, I think, is a meaningful animal story. The next one is more of a cute animal story. And this involves a gentleman from Georgia and his emotional support alligator. whose name apparently is Wally. And hello to Nikki in the chat room, and hello to Steve in the chat room. It's good to see you both. And my understanding of the story is that Wally, the emotional support alligator, has gone missing. And this is the same alligator who achieved considerable media popularity last year when he was denied entry to a Philadelphia Phillies game. And, I have to say the same thing now that I would have said then, an emotional support alligator. I can understand having an alligator as a pet. I can understand being very attached to it, but how exactly is it emotionally supporting you? Um, I guess it could. It strikes me as a very odd kind of thing. I certainly hope that wherever Wally is safe. Um, in Florida, he's certainly not alone, but because we did have alligators all over Florida, but apparently the gentleman had been traveling with his emotional support alligator, and he believes someone stole the alligator out of a fenced enclosure, and I'm not entirely sure what to say about it. Now, the gentleman says that Wally has never tried to bite anyone, which is certainly good because they bite rather hard, and nobody has apparently filed any police reports on the missing alligator. Um, and it looks like he may have been taken and released back into nature, which um, I'm not quite sure what to say about that because I don't know, would he be able to survive there if he's been raised domestically? Um, and apparently, although this gentleman is from Georgia, it is illegal to be keeping alligators without a special license in Georgia. Um, and I'm not really quite sure what to say about it. I certainly feel for the gentleman who's lost his alligator, and I feel for the alligator um, because I question whether it was prepared to be released back into the wild. And on one hand, it seems like this would always be a good thing to do, but if you're talking about a domesticated animal, um, it doesn't necessarily know what to do if you just release it back into the wild. This is why there are a lot of programs for releasing primates and other animals back into the wild in Africa and other parts of the world, for example, that usually involve an extensive period of acclimating them to what they need to know for living that way. Um, I suppose maybe an alligator doesn't really need to know anything that doesn't come to it naturally. I don't know that much about alligators, but I don't know that I'd really recommend keeping an emotional support alligator as a particularly good idea for you or the alligator. And this is a good reason because it would seem to me, reading this story, that if in fact someone arranged for it to be, quote, stolen, end quote, and released back into the wild, um, this would probably have been entirely well intentioned and the normal thing you do if you see an alligator in somebody's yard or walking around on the sidewalk. Um, People would never assume that they were looking at an emotional support alligator. And I can tell you, I have been in Florida and seen an alligator on the sidewalk. It's not that common, but it's not uncommon, or alligators in people's backyards, and they don't normally bring them inside and give them a snack because the snack will likely be whatever the family pet may be, or maybe the person. Um, they are not normally people-friendly creatures. So if someone did do this, I'm sure they were acting entirely out of good intentions. And I'm not really sure what to say to the gentleman who has lost his emotional support animal, except, maybe you should have had a vest for it, explaining what it was. Now, having said that, um, do I understand how you could be very emotionally attached to an alligator and have it as your emotional support animal? I kind of do. When I lived in Florida, we had a large tortoise named Mr. Turtle, who was very personable and very easy to get attached to. He was a sweet boy, quote unquote. He had, for a creature with relatively few facial muscles, he had a great ability to display emotion, and he was very memorable and very easy to attach to. And hello to Jasper in the chat room. It's good to see you. Um, so yeah, I get that. And I rather imagine that the emotional support alligator probably did have a good rapport with its person and probably is capable of a lot more emotional interaction than I would have assumed. And so this kind of puts this in a certain way in the same category as our first story, because while I may make a little fun of the idea of an emotional support alligator, and I don't think it's a good idea for various reasons, including the fact that something like this can happen, um, and that in the end, an alligator is a wild creature that can be unpredictable and can do quite a bit of damage, much more so than, say, a tortoise. And tortoises are commonly kept as pets. Alligators, not so much. Alligators are kept they're kept in your moat to defend your castle. They're not usually kept in the courtyard. Um, but can it fulfill that purpose? Well, obviously it did. This gentleman was very, very happy and fulfilled with his emotional support alligator, who obviously had an emotional rapport with him. So I would have to say that, yeah, alligators too are capable of more than we would probably assume in terms of interacting with humans or otherwise. And because we think of them as a predatory wild animal that we don't want on our sidewalk, we never stop to think of that. But maybe alligators are people too. Um, it is an interesting story in that sense. And I think these are not the last stories we'll be dealing with on Weekly Roundup about what animals can do that we didn't think they could do. I think we're going to see more of that. And like I've said before, even earlier in this broadcast, I don't think that should lead us to a Disneyfication of our attitude toward animals. And hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. But I think it should lead us to a much more sophisticated way of interacting with nature and with animals. And what do I mean when I say Disneyfy our relationship with animals? I mean that we should not cartoonize them. Even while we realize they're capable of far more than we perhaps had thought, um, we don't want to we don't want to imagine them as being eternal children, which is kind of the Disneyfied view. They are creatures with their own lives and motivations that are not um, going to be singing and helping Snow White every moment of the day. They have their own world, and we need to remember their world is as sophisticated and complex as our own, one of the things that greater understanding toward animals sometimes unfortunately does is it causes us to infantilize them. And first anthropomorphize them, then infantilize them. And I don't think that is the appropriate response to this. Understanding that, yes, they are far more, well, far more sentient than we have taken them to be, which I think we'll find is also true of plants. But that is not the same as infantilizing them. And hello to Zane in the chat room. And I think that particularly in a religion with as much focus on nature as the one that most of us follow, or the ones that most of us follow, we need to be mindful of maintaining a realistic look at the world. What do we mean by this? There's an old example um, that if the tiger is hunting, um, I'm going to say a lamb because I don't remember or a goat or whatever small animal. It doesn't mean the tiger is bad. It means the tiger is a tiger. It's what tigers do. Um, There's a famous example from a different religion of lions laying down with lambs. And I've always said, the only time a lion is going to lay down with a lamb is one, if they're in the same zoo and have grown up together, and two, if the lion is eating the lamb. Um, it's not what lions do. Lambs are food for lions. It's how nature put it together. And we need not to infantilize them to think that there's some pathology there. The lion is not meant to be a vegetarian. I remember a famous animal rights activist once who was very proud of having made their cat into a vegetarian and feeding them broccoli. And I don't doubt that the cat may have liked broccoli, but cats really aren't meant to be vegetarians. And I can't imagine it was particularly healthy for a system that's not designed for it. So we want to remember that nature is complex and that it does always involve things that may not constantly be pleasant. And that too is part of revering nature. As Lady Bitterwind used to always focus on, you have to remember the whole thing about predator and prey, because if you revere nature, then you must acknowledge this as part of it because it's obviously part of it and has always been. Even before we had animals, we had predators and prey. Even when we were microscopic life forms, as far as we can tell, there were already predators and prey. It's how nature set it up. And it might be comforting for us to try to imagine it as a kind of fairy tale where everyone gets along, but that's not revering nature. That is rejecting nature. Um, doesn't mean we want to go out and necessarily implement the predator and prey thing in every aspect of life, but rather that we need to remember a tiger is a tiger, a cat is a cat, and not blame them for being what they are. Um, Cats are with us because they hunted rodents. It's generally felt that cats domesticated themselves and/or we domesticated them, or we domesticated each other, so that they could hunt the rodents in our food supplies, which was helpful to us and helpful to them. And then they found out that they kind of liked us, and we kind of liked them. Um, and it turned into a wonderful relationship that have allowed cats to take over the planet. And for the most part, humans have been happy being a servant species to the cat, much as we're mostly happy being a servant species to grass, who rules so much of the planet as well. Um, but anyway, those are our nature stories for this week. I do have another story for today, and this has to do with what you're going to be seeing coming up on Midday with Reverend Don, and on Corellian TV and Divination TV, and several other places, um, and the Corellian Press Corps, in the next week or so. And we have the Lustration of the Ancestors coming next weekend. It's finally right on top of us, and in fact, people have already left to head for Danville for this event, and will be arriving some as early as the next day or so. And and all of them by next Friday when the event will have its opening ceremonies. And you can expect to see film coming from that event on all of these different platforms. And exactly when it will start remains to be seen. There are some questions about bandwidth and so forth, so we're going to see exactly what we can do. But watch for announcements, and whatever we can or cannot um, do, we will be doing as much as we can. And there will be film coming of all the major events at Lustration. And this lustration is a special one because we have a double investiture on Saturday of the new first priest and first priestess, Lord Phoenix and Lady Alyssa, which will be the first double investiture in the Corellian tradition since 1979, and probably the only one for an equal period of time, if not ever, because the system is not really set up for double investitures. It has been 45 years since the last one. So if you have the chance to see this one, and even more if you have the chance to be at this one, it may be the only real chance you get. Of the people who were present 45 years ago for the last double investiture, exactly two of us are still living. Of the people who were in the Corellian tradition 45 years ago, I think we're down to just two of us still living. Um, yeah, I think we're there. And, but of course, 45 years was a very long time. And a lot has happened. The Corellian tradition is not what it was 45 years ago. 45 years ago, it was a small familial tradition with a tiny bit of a public arm that was at that point still at arm's distance. But after 79, we became a public tradition, and we have grown around the world since then. If you could go back to the late 70s, um, the ancestors had predicted everything that has come about. But, if you'd tried to imagine it, I'm not sure you could have done it. If you'd tried to imagine it looking at what currently existed, it would be very hard to imagine. And knowing what was available at that time, hard to imagine how this growth was going to occur. But it has, and we're very proud of it. We're very proud of the people that we have. Um, we have wonderful people, and like any tradition, any church, any group, people come and go. And we're very, very proud of the fact that, we never tell people, you must come to us. You can go wherever you want to go. One size does not fit all. And we never tell people you cannot go from us because, it's like a marriage. A marriage may not last forever, but that doesn't mean it was a failure. It can still accomplish many great purposes for the people involved, and yet you still eventually must go your separate ways. Sometimes that happens. I look back at my own marriage, which did end with divorce, but I don't see it as a failure. I see that many good things came from it. I think it was good for both my late wife and myself. It was certainly good for our son, who wouldn't be here otherwise. So the fact that it was not something that lasted for life was not a mistake, because we don't always walk one path our entire life. Sometimes we walk a certain path for a while and move on. And I think this is important to realize when we talk about faith. It's a living, growing thing. When we talk about religion, when we talk about churches, it's a living, growing thing, and what you need may change. But for those for whom Corellianism is the right path, our doors are always open. And I know that the new first priesthood share my view in that, and we're hoping for lots of people coming to the event and lots of people watching it. And I'm looking forward personally to meeting many of the people who I know are coming to Lustration, whom I've not physically met before, and to seeing those that I have met before, but may not have seen for several years. So it's going to be a wonderful time. We will be covering all of the major ritual occurrences, of which there are many, as well as doing interviews and stories about all kinds of different aspects of this event. So be watching for that. It's going to be a wonderful time. And I'm sure I'll be talking much more about this next week. So thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me all this week. And sometime in the next few days, I'll be posting next week's stories. And we will see what they turn out to be. And with that, let us close with our prayer as we always do. And, um, and I will see you on Monday. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we pray that we shall go forward together, hand in hand, for many years to come. We rejoice in this world that we walk this path through, and the many creatures that we share it with, and we ask you to help us to see more accurately the nature of the animals and plants and organisms and spiritual entities that share this world with us, to be mindful of them and to be aware of them and their needs as well as our own. Help us to dance the dance of life with grace and joy. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, we thank you with great love and thanks, and may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and I will see you on Monday.